Where I want to start off is talking about how confidence relates to momentum. And when we talk about momentum, this is the idea of creating momentum, sustaining it, and also preventing other teams' momentum.
Mhm.
And I feel like confidence is a great place to start because where my mind goes when I think of a team that has a lot of momentum is they just have a lot of confidence. And maybe that is because they trust one another or they trust themselves to do their job. Where do you go when thinking about how confidence relates to momentum?
Uh, so confidence, you're right, is a huge buffer for anything that we're trying to produce in a performing world. Uh, this goes back to that spectrum again. A lot of people look at confidence again binarily. They say, "Do you have it or don't you have it?" And so people will sometimes bluster and like, "Well, the arrogance, duh, of course I'm confident," and you could become cocky and overly confident, and it can really lead you down a bad path. But you're like, "Well, what are my options? I'm either confident or I'm not." But a better way in my mind, and the way that I really work with athletes or anyone performing, is confidence is on a spectrum. It's the degree of certainty you have that you can execute the task at hand in the manner of which you believe is what's necessary. And that means I can break it down into a percentage. Then I can say, how confident are you right now? And you don't have to be yes or no, on or off. It doesn't have to be 0 or 100. It could be, I'm 65% confident. And I can work with that, and I can take variables out of that and add variables to it to take you from 60, 65, 70%. Let's bump you up to 80 or 85%. Because who doesn't want to be an extra 15 to 20% more confident? And so then all of a sudden you have control. And if you can take some of those variables and add control, then you are focusing on what you can do versus what you can't do. And it goes back to that negative facilitation again, in a sense. You are honing down to the base level of, geez, we're getting beat right now. What is it I can do to make progress? And then you have confidence to say, well, that worked. I should keep doing that. And then you start to build up that automaticity again, as we said, and you may get into a flow state and you may get a bigger swing to it. So confidence is really huge, but it really should be, in my mind, viewed as a degree of certainty to which you can execute that task, and not just a binary, you got it or you don't.
Do you think it's possible for a team or an individual to create and sustain momentum if they don't feel confident?
Probably, but I mean, I would assume that it's more fleeting than not, and it just wouldn't be held out in the same regard. It's that even a blind squirrel can find a nut in the woods every now and then. I look at confidence as that buffer again for all performance. That I really incorporate that into any skills training I'm doing, or anything else. So in order to sustain momentum, I believe that you have to have a degree of confidence that you can control and you can put into play and you can really grasp onto. If you don't, then it may just be, well, they took their foot off the gas again and I got lucky. And so that's where you think you saw a momentum shift, but it was really just a fluke.
Yeah. I think a lot of that might be more common than people think, that there are flukes out there that might look like something that it's like, oh, he's playing with a lot of confidence, but it could have just been a low confident play that happened to work out. But let's move on to another mental quality, and that is resiliency. So the ability to bounce back from mistakes, persevere through adversity. This feels very relevant to staving off momentum from opponents.
Mhm.
If someone gets in their own mind and thinks they're doomed because the other team is gaining momentum, that is obviously going to facilitate even more momentum for the opponent.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about resiliency and the connection to momentum?
Yeah, you're right. The need to be resilient is high because you have to be ready for those swings and those shifts, and you have to mitigate what's happening. You are always looking to control what you can. If you're trying to get the momentum shift in your favor, you're trying to really be able to hone in on what works for you, play your game, and see you just overpower someone else. But you need to understand, if you trip up, if that fluke happens to you when you're winning, you're trying to avoid the positive inhibition. You're just ahead 3 or 4 scores, and you're like, man, well, I don't want to risk hurting myself or something like that. Okay, but what if you are just um, they came back. They recognized and they were able to put one of those breaks into that gradual momentum that you had. Okay, but how do I stop them now? Like before it gets out of hand, I need to understand what my coping mechanisms are, where my level of resilience is to be able to navigate. So I can, as you were saying, I can find a way to go over, under, around, or through that barrier. I need to have the resilience necessary to then be able to say, okay, this isn't going to get out of control now. I'm not going to get in my own head. I'm not going to add too many more variables I can't control that are going to then completely derail what I was hoping for.
What I think of when I think about resiliency is getting to neutral, which was made famous by Trevor Moawad. So it's again that not being too emotional about that momentum shift and getting really negative and pessimistic, but getting neutral and objective and asking, okay, what's important now? What am I going to do about this? And getting that's the best chance of overcoming obstacles and momentum shifts. So good point there.
Yeah. Thinking about micro and macro again, real fast. I mean, that's where you see some of those teams that just say, look, we're blowing them out, but I can't let up. And I might get flack for it at the end of the game because, there's 30 seconds to go and you just punched in another touchdown. Like, what's going on? Or why did you pass? You're supposed to run the clock down and you just like, come on, now you're just running up the score on us. But what's the alternative? You may have that huge swing come back again. So when you see these teams that just will not let up, part of it could be in their DNA and their philosophy and how they structure and the resilience that they have to say, we just keep going. Every play is like last play. If it went badly, we flush it and we get ready for the next. If it went good, awesome. Do we get another play? Great. Let's make it the exact same. And so societal pressures come out there somewhere where then you got to talk to the media afterwards. You have to explain to the other team, parents like, whoa, why did your kids do that? You want us to teach them development skills to succeed. Well, these are the best ones you got. And sometimes it looks a little uglier than not.
It's a tactic to avoid being that embarrassing story of a miraculous comeback. Whereas no, you kept your foot on the gas, and although it might have been uncomfortable, you're not going to be embarrassed. But yeah, definitely have to do some explaining sometimes afterward. But let's move on to motivation. Where my mind goes is motivation is very high at this idea of creating momentum because you have that confidence that you're going to achieve a goal of maybe winning or catching back up. And energy is a very big factor in momentum. And I feel like that stems from motivation. So, where do you go in thinking about motivation and its ties to creating momentum?
Yeah. Whenever I think about motivation, I immediately go to self-determination theory with DC and Ryan. And anybody who hasn't heard of that before, it's a wonderful rabbit hole to dig into. Uh, and I would say that with that, the motivation has multiple facets to it. There is the autonomy component of I get to do what I want to do and be here and understand where I want to go. The confidence or the competency, how well can I execute and do what is expected of me and what I expect of myself? And how related am I? How well do I have trust and synchronicity and engagement with others and a degree of which I know it's all going to come together? When you can put those components all into play, you can really enhance that motivation of the ability to achieve. And so for motivation, I frequently dig into the autonomy component early on first. And I try to make sure people understand how multifaceted that is. And that, autonomy is I got to make this choice. I get to decide what I want to do. And if you look at DC and Ryan's work on where autonomy is on a spectrum, whether it be an external factor or an internal factor, and you dig into what those intrinsic components are, the things that are just natural to you, your core values and core beliefs, the things that say I am who I am and you're not stopping me. This is just how I live my life. If you can tap into those components, you can leverage, never ending energy, right? If you can figure out what it is that you value that motivates you, then you're going to dig deep even during those hard times. And you're going to have those bedrock values that you can say, this is a part of why I get up and I perform. why I execute. And teams try to work on that. You have philosophies, you have team values and goals and what we buy into. But think about the professional sporting world. You're on this team today, but what team are you on tomorrow? How quickly are you having to adhere to a different set of values or norms, that people are playing? Your role may still be the same. You're still expected to execute at this high level, or anchor this part of the team, but the way you get there is somewhat different. So you're trying to dance around those values that may be espoused by your organization, by your team, by whomever, but you're also trying to figure out what's internal to you, what is intrinsic in your world that will never change no matter what team you go to or where you go. And if you can kind of put some of those into place, what you're going to find is that you have that never ending source of energy. Now, everyone taps into it a little bit differently, but you're not going to be able to give it up. You're going to say, hard work, persistence, achievement, family. These are all values that are going to be me no matter where I am. And you can rely on me. You can trust me. And I'm going to be open with you to say that these are who I am. So expect it every time and lean on me. Leverage me. I leverage them. Now we bolster our resilience again. We bolster our communication and the confidence goes up. And then even when we're hurt, even when we're tired, I got your back because I've demonstrated that in the past. And the motivation remains high to play for the person to the left or right of you, or even to trust yourself and say, this is an individual sport, but I can really focus in on why I'm doing this. Simon Sinek, that why is like really strong with me. That's what's going to help me drive on.
And that's a really good example of mental toughness in the athletes that are able to sustain that energy when it would be very difficult for a lot of people to sustain it. And they do so anyways because they've done this training of becoming aware of their values. They have this self-determination theory, these components of motivation locked down. And also, that beautifully comes back to your thesis when you talked about alignment and the relatedness component of self-determination theory and how important that is for momentum. Because if relatedness and being connected to your team and coaches is important for motivation, you can also see how that feeds into momentum, and having that increased motivation will improve the ability to create and sustain momentum and stave it off.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's talk about self-talk. And I think we kind of talked about this in resiliency as how you can be more objective and neutral rather than getting very negative. How else do you think it's relevant to talk about self-talk in the context of momentum?
Ooh. Well, I mean, mental skills are all about self-talk in so many ways. You're either taking a cognitive behavioral approach to it. My thoughts drive my actions, how I feel and what I do. Or you're jumping in with more of a mindfulness area, which is I'm trying to reduce my thoughts so that I have control, not control over them, but at least there are fewer variables to get in my way. I can then target what I do want to attack and know that that's the only thing that is there with me. So I really think that self-talk is a huge component to any performance, especially momentum, because of the fact those variables, again, we want to be able to target what is going to give us the outcome we're looking for. And so if we recognize that our perceptions, our thoughts drive how we feel and what we do, we can pre-plan those. We can pre-program, we can prime ourselves to adjust our energy as necessary. Football, quite often, everyone goes to those big hit videos to get hyped up, right? You have the linebackers smacking helmets like, let's do this. This is our house. We're going, and everyone around them is like hooting and hollering and bouncing, and that's great and all, except most research shows that on average, more than 50% of the people actually have an excessive amount of energy to be in their optimal zone of functioning, and they need to bring that energy down to a stage where they can focus and execute at a high level or to perform their best. So hitting helmets and like getting hyped up is not really going to do it. It goes back to your resilience again. What is your coping? How do I get myself into that zone? Cognitive behavioral thoughts, self-talk is one of those ways. I need to align my thoughts with what I'm going to get on the backside. If I say that, you know, this is my house, this is something that people aren't going to take from me, and that hypes me up, and I need to get hyped up, I'm going to say that because now my energy has gone up. But if I say, you've been here before, you're good at this, you know your job, you feel strong because you are strong. And that allows me to have some confidence, and it allows me to bring my energy down so I can be right in that optimal zone of functioning. That's what I need to do to get to where I need to control those variables and to execute and produce over and over again, so I can get into that flow state, so I can be in a space that allows me to have automaticity and know that, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I expected. And even if I get jolted a little bit, even if I get knocked off my high horse, I don't go on tilt, because I can go back to that baseline again. I can flush the last bad play, or I had the momentum and it got broken. Okay, but it's not a swing. It just got broken. Let's start going back into, I want another gradual buildup of momentum again. Even though you broke my momentum before, maybe it was a fluke, maybe not. But I need to understand how my thoughts are aligning with the outcomes I'm trying to get, and how I can put those into play to succeed more frequently.
Let's finish this up by talking about how being present and experiencing a flow state or being in the zone is a very important ingredient for momentum. And just to start us off here, I think of it as when there is this big momentum shift within a team or individual, they have very effective focus and it's unwavering. So they're focused on the right things and they have that confidence to also maintain the focus. You never see, I imagine, athletes and teams with momentum focused on the wrong things, like dwelling on the past for too long and creating this anger or guilt and frustration, or jumping up to the future and creating this panic or anxiety. That is very rarely seen in these momentum shifts. So being present, would you agree, is a very important ingredient for momentum? And also being present is something everyone is already doing if they're in a flow state. And I imagine there's a lot of flow state being involved with these momentum shifts.
Yeah, I would say you're correct, because I mean, the concept of flow, studied Csikszentmihalyi, really looking at how people get into flow and what that entails and what are some of the aspects of it. Really breaks down to that you have the exact skill set and requirements necessary to meet the task at hand perfectly. So everything aligns perfectly, and I was made for this task. It comes natural, it becomes automatic, and then it happens over and over and over again. Almost that oscillation of synchronicity, right? It's just continuing. And when people find themselves in that quote unquote flow state, which is again it's difficult. It's a qualitative kind of, people talk about it and they tell you, oh, I was in that. Okay, well, how do you know? What was it like? People have time and space dilation, in a sense, where they're like, man, that game went so fast. I didn't even know that I scored 50. Like, holy crap, And it just seemed natural. It just kept going. And it's because, again, that task and skill have lined up perfectly. And when that happens, you see, you do. It's almost that simple. And the variables are minimized. I see, I do, wash, rinse, repeat.
It's like almost animalistic. You're not overthinking in any way that relates to the past or the future. You're just seeing and you're doing. You're processing everything as it comes.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's all there is to it. Somebody else put constraints on you. Somebody else put a time clock there, or somebody else put whatever it may be that says, here's the start and stop of this measured performance. But in reality, you find yourself very present in that moment, and all you do is execute what is perceived to be perfectly, because you have the skills necessary to meet that task better than your opponent, or to the best of your ability to really just prove that you can time it again, just keep moving in the way you want. And it's not an easy state to get to. You may be the best player out there and you may not feel like you're in flow all the time. It may feel like it's a slog, or you're really digging to, oh man, I scored 50, but I definitely knew every single one of those 50 I scored. The flow states and that being present really allows you to almost float in a sense of where you're at and transcend a little bit of some of those other constructs that you see around you, because it's just here and now and in this moment.
Just another reason why doing things to be in the present moment throughout a game is important, because that's
Yeah.
where so many of these great performances come from, of being present and not being stuck in the past or jumping to the future.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I would say, to a question you had earlier, how do you prevent your opponent from, having these massive swings or shifts or anything else? And it's what skills do you have in your back pocket to bring yourself back to the present moment? To really attach to that variable or variables that are necessary to execute the task at hand with your skill development and degree. And the more of those that you can do, the more likely you are to succeed at a higher level and to have positive momentum on your side, as opposed to having the negative shift that you can't seem to scramble back from and stop.
Always comes back to being present.